Hello, friends. Welcome to the Jason Nellis Show. I'm Jason Nellis. For those of you that are here watching on YouTube, you'll notice that it's a little darker than it is normally. It's nighttime. I'm sitting here recording and enjoying a little bit of solitude, which for a husband and father is a little bit rare. You know how it is. You're here in these moments where you get to listen to the music you want to listen to, watch the stuff you want to watch. Nobody can tell you what to do or what to say. It's rare. It's nice. For me, it's a precious commodity, at least these days. But for today's interview, I spoke with Jerome Rand, who's a professional sailor who gets alone time like this pretty much all the time. Jerome is an incredible and accomplished sailor who has been around the world on his own. He's hiked the Appalachian Trail. I've known him for nearly 20 years now, and he is one of the most remarkable and interesting people I think you'll ever meet. Jerome has turned his story into a podcast and a Patreon and an Instagram account, all under the title Sailing into Oblivion. He's even written a book about it. So if after today's interview you're interested in what he has to say and you want to check out more, go to any of those spots and look up Sailing into Oblivion, and you'll be sure to find him. I hope you enjoyed today's interview. I know I really did. And with that, let's dive in. And we're here today with Jerome Rand, sailor extraordinaire and podcaster of the millennium. There's no body of science that's suggesting that I am. That one's just on me. But Jerome, it's good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm very well, Jason. Thank you so much for having me on. This is so cool. I've always felt like there's a kindred spirit amongst podcasters. And when I came across the fact that you had a show, I've been doing mine for a couple of years, I had to reach out because you got to collaborate, you know?
I mean, as the first person who's ever reached out to me to be like, hey, man, like you and I should do podcasts together. This is a true honor for me. You've got a much bigger audience than I do. So I'm thrilled. I'll take it.
Well, it is. It's been an adventure for sure. And that, you're hinting at a subject that trying to find guests and get people to come on a show, almost 100% of my guests that I sit down and talk to, it's their first podcast. So you got to get over those humps of nervousness, all that sort of stuff. But, you start to get those quality people on. And I find that even in my little intro, I say sitting down with everyday people who do extraordinary things, because I think everybody has a little bit of extraordinary in them, even if they don't think they do.
Couldn't believe that anymore. I'm with you 100%. Let's set the stage for everybody because, you and I have known each other a long time, although to be fair, last week when we chatted, that's the first time we've probably spoken in a decade and a half. You and I got to know each other many, many years ago at Camp Michigania, the alumni camp of the University of Michigan, where I spent a summer working in between living in Chicago and moving to the West Coast. And you basically, when I showed up, were the guy that everybody was like, oh, I mean, it's Jerome, as if that like Prince or Sting. It was just one name, and it was just like, you got to know the guy.
Wow. That was just longevity on my side at that point. I think by the time you got there for your first year, I had been there for 7 years or something like that. And I don't know, it did. I sort of fit in over there for sure. I don't know what it was, but
I mean, well, and this is the thing that I think is important for everybody to know. From the moment that we first met, it was clear to me in all the time I'd lived before that point, and I was, I think, 23 when I showed up at that point. I had never met somebody that the first time I looked at them, I go, okay, that's what a sailor is. Because, growing up, I grew up on the Chesapeake Bay. We'd done canoeing, we'd done kayaking, but I'd never really done sailing in my life. But when I met you and I met the rest of the folks who were working sailing at that camp, you were the first person I met who I went, oh, this is what a sailor embodies, that sense of adventure, that sense of the unknown, the like, yeah, this thing's about to flip upside down. What are we going to do about it? I don't know, man. Let's just figure it out. And that spirit was contagious from day one. So I'd love to start with just sort of like, how was it that not just getting into sailing, but you've made that your life's passion, walk me through it, sort of what got you into it from the beginning and what takes you there now as a professional sailor?
Well, it's funny because it was kind of a coincidental lucky break. I think I think there's a part of every son that wants to impress their father. And my father, his biggest passion, or he never turned it into a job, but sailing was a huge part of his life. He always did it. He didn't really include us in it, so to speak, besides just as rail meat sitting there trying to balance a boat out when we were kids. But by the time I reached about 18, he gave me my first little 15-minute lesson and sort of shoved me off the beach. And it clicked with me, as if somebody who can just suddenly play the piano just sits down and they're like, oh yeah, this is easy. That's kind of how it was for me. And I thought, oh, okay, well, this is kind of cool. And my passion sort of developed. The more I saw that I did that and got into it, the more the old man was sort of like, oh, this is cool, let's go sailing and all that. And I think honestly, I kept pushing it forward, half because I was passionate about it, but the other half is I was like, oh, I can finally like impress the old man. I'm doing something that he thinks is cool. And eventually took it to a whole different level. Once I was working at camp and teaching sailing, then in the off season going down, doing yacht deliveries, Caribbean, across the Atlantic and all that, which ended up culminating in the trip around the world. And that was kind of a bittersweet thing in a way, especially between my father and I, because I think that was the step that I took where he essentially was like, he had to like tip the hat and sort of be like, well, you're the more experienced one now. And so it was good, but it was also, I could see a little part of him sort of shrivel up a little bit, maybe.
I get that. Listen, as a dad, you want your kid to surpass you, but you're not ready for it when it happens. Thankfully, it hasn't happened for me yet, although the rate my son is growing, that's 3 minutes away. And I don't know that I've yet impressed my own father, so that's a conversation for another day. But you took it, you took it beyond. You and I were chatting before about, not just the yacht deliveries, but the weeks on end you've spent, navigating choppy waters, smooth waters. You talked about some of the more harrowing experiences you've had on your own podcast. Was there a moment when it clicked for you that this was going to be your life, that this was going to be the thing that you were going to follow as your career sort of, as long as you have up until this point?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to stick with, while I could, I wanted to stick with the water sports, small boats, beaches, teaching lessons, things like that. And in order to do that outside of Michigan, or outside of the winters here in Michigan, you have to go south. And so I sought out going down to the Caribbean. And the only trouble with that exact lifestyle, where, it's a water sports center, is that you do have a shelf life. Nobody wants a 55-year-old shirtless guy walking around trying to teach, 12-year-olds how to sail. There's just a limit to how long you can do it. And I pushed that envelope really, really far, pretty much to the edge, and maybe even beyond. But it was interesting. In 2012, I had been in the Caribbean, running this water sports center, very, very busy, high intensity job. And I needed a break after 5 years. I was so burnt out. I could barely keep a smile on my face. And so I went off and did the Appalachian Trail. And 4.5 months later, walking through the woods, miserable, wonderful, a whole slew of emotions. At the end of that, I just had this epiphany that, life's not all just about work, and these adventures are a challenge. So they're kind of in the same realm, but they're fulfilling in a whole different way. And from then on, it literally, before I got off of Mount Katahdin up in Maine, the last hill you climb on the trail, I essentially had decided, okay, well, I'm going to go for the solo sail around the world and see if I can take that one on. And that wasn't like okay, well, I'll go hop on a boat and go do it. That was like 5 years of planning from that point forward, because I essentially, at that point, all I had was a backpack and a big beard and no money and no job and, no boat. So it was a lot of planning to go into it. But that one adventure kind of led to the big one.
I love that. Talk to me a little bit about the beginnings of the podcast, because one of the challenges that I have, as I'm sure you've experienced, is the idea of a podcast seems really simple, right? I'm going to put two microphones in front of people. We're just going to record, and whatever we get out of it, we're going to make it interesting, which of course is not the way it goes. There's prep work, there's technical issues. And more than that, the subject of your podcast is as often your own thoughts as it is other people in the world of sailing. And these folks are not necessarily accustomed to being interviewed in the way that you're interviewing them. So walk me through a little bit, sort of like, if I'm a sailor that you're friendly with in a port in the Caribbean and you want to record me, like, how do you talk me into that? And what's the process like for you to get them recorded and then live on your own podcast?
It takes a little bit of twisting the old arm because, like I said, most people are pretty nervous. And I can remember the very first podcast I was a guest on. I don't even think it's still on the air anymore, but I can remember sweating bullets. And it was either over Zoom or over the phone. I can't remember, but it had no video. It was just the audio. And I can remember my voice sort of cracking and all that sort of stuff. And, now 200 and something shows later, it's no big deal for sure. But when I sit down with people, I kind of have to take some serious tact. And you can't just throw it out to somebody that you don't know at all. A lot of times they'll just recoil with fear. So I end up typically trying to get to know somebody a little bit, get the conversation going, drop the seed that I do a podcast, and then usually we talk about it a little bit, or it might be actually a couple of days later that I'll say, hey, what do you think? But I always make sure that I try and lead with, there's no video. It's just the microphones. We don't do it live. Those are sort of the comfort factors that I throw their way. And in the end, I always say, if we sit down and talk and you don't like what you said, I'm not going to put it out. So don't worry about that. So there's a little bit of a guarantee thrown in the side, but I have yet to have anybody want to do more than maybe edit out one or two really stupid things they said. And that I have no problem with. I'm not going to try and get you on anything.
Right. This isn't investigative journalism for a,
No.
for a tabloid, right? We're just talking. It's fine. I love that. Do you feel like people ease into the conversation quickly, or does it take them a while to sort of get into the tone of the podcast? Because I know sometimes when I interview folks on camera, you can feel the stiffness for a few minutes, right? We always do a few minutes of just pre-talk before we actually hit record, because I want them to feel comfortable talking to me before they're talking to a camera, so to speak.
Well, and yeah, that I used to have a little trick for that as well, where I would sit down and we'd just be chatting away, and I'd hit the record button, so they didn't know we were actually recording, and we could talk for 5 minutes, just shooting the breeze. It didn't really matter. I never really I do my own intro separate, and then we just jump right in. And usually after a few minutes, they'll be like, well, are we going to start? And I'll be like, oh, we're already going. And all of a sudden it's like they've broken through that barrier of nervousness, and because we're already chatting away. And then I can go back and, clean that up a little bit, edit some of that out. But that seems to work pretty well. When we're under a time crunch though, and say I only have 1 hour to do this, yeah, it usually takes a good 5-10 minutes before they loosen up. And then the funniest thing is we'll get to an hour. I'm always kind of have one eye over on the clock, and I'll say, hey, we're already at an hour. We might as well wrap this up. And they're like, what? It's been an hour already? And that's when I think, you're doing a decent job, at least as far as the conversation goes, when the person being interviewed has no idea how fast the time is flying.
100%. Well, and I think you've just sort of hit the nail on the head about what I try to make as the goal. And by the way, it's so nice to talk to somebody about this, particularly on camera, to be like, oh my, you watch the clock too the whole time? Like I've got one eye open. It's like, if I could reverse split my eyes, like I'm a lizard, that'd be perfect. But yeah, I mean, I find the hard part, really is convincing people that it's not an interview, but a conversation, and they should treat it like you and I are sitting down, as we are virtually, having coffee and just like shooting the breeze. And it's really challenging for people who don't do this on the regular to get into that space. And I love that for you, the solution is just hit record. Don't let them know that you're recording. Don't say anything without their permission, of course, but that you get that sort of ease for them very subtly, I think is a really smart tactic. When they hear the final recording, do you ever get feedback that like, they want to do it again, or they're exuberant about the result? Like, what's generally, the response you hear from folks?
I'd say it's a mixed bag just because some people, or I'd say most people, don't like the sound of their own voice, myself included. I rarely
But I
listen
love
to
the sound of your voice. Wait a minute. Come on now.
Well, and
Come
I
on.
love the sound of your voice. It sounds
buddy.
it's deep and buttery and just,
Buttery.
But
I'm putting that on a
most
t-shirt.
there we go. Yeah, it sounds like butter, baby. But yeah, most people don't like to listen to themselves. I will get maybe 50% will listen to the podcast, or their spouse will, or something like that. And the feedback's always been very positive, and from my listeners, they've always been great. They can go through the website and stuff and contact me directly. And I that's the one nice part about having sort of a smaller following, is that you can actually respond to these emails. It's one thing dealing with comments on YouTube or Instagram. Once you reach a certain point, you just don't have time to do that. But with an actual email that's been sent to you, you get one or two of those a week. You can thoughtfully email them back and not feel like, oh, this is too much of a burden. So that's kind of nice. But I will say, on the note of people listening to their own podcasts, I do quite a few with my older brother Sven. And he also is in the sailing industry. He's been a master sailmaker for like 20 years. He too has a very buttery, low, deep voice, and he listens to the podcasts that we do usually about 10 times in a row. He just loves the sound of his own voice and what he says and all that. He's one of those types of guys. And if you listen to one of the Sven casts, you'd know why, but he's great. He will literally text me an hour after I posted one done with him, just to be like, oh, dude, I just listened to it. It was great.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I am still on the side of the fence of self-critical. I will listen to these recordings and I'll think, oh, I didn't EQ that right, or I'll do something nerdy. But I love it when somebody's like, I listened to mine like 3 times. I thought that was great. Can we do that again sometime soon? It's rare for me. I'm glad to hear that your brother is such a good supporter of all that. But one thing I want to tack towards that I think is you called out that's really interesting is your audience, right? You've built up enough of a following doing these over and over again that you do get some emails, and you've gotten some great download numbers, and even you have a Patreon now to support the podcast itself. Have you thought about turning this into a full-time thing, or is it going to stay sort of the like lightly managed, somewhat monetized thing that you've got going now, keeping it more hobby than professional?
Oh, this would be, if I had my choice of all the different platforms where I'm trying to create like a small revenue stream and everything, the podcast is number one. If I could choose one to just dive right into and keep going, because when we talked the other day, one of my favorite parts about this is that it's a perfect excuse to just sit down with somebody, undistracted, phones are off, you got an hour or two just to chat, and you're going to learn stuff, you're going to share ideas, and that's just something that's kind of becoming rare in this world. I mean, I grew up in the 80s before all the computers and cell phones and stuff, and we used to sit around and talk all the time. And these days it gets hard to do that at length. And I've been able to go out to sea by myself with a couple hundred podcasts, download various shows, and be able to feel connected to humanity a little bit, even when I'm the most isolated person in the world. And if I can bring sort of my own little niche to it and some of my own experiences, hey, that's perfect. That's what I want to do. So the podcast is definitely number one there. It's the one that I find most rewarding and most enjoyable.
I love that. I love too that we live in a world now, even though, yes, you grew up in the 80s prior to computers, but it's kind of better now with, iPhones and devices where you can load up hundreds of hours of music and podcasts so that you're not, stranded in the middle of nowhere, as we've talked about, with no music and basically just sort of your own thoughts to drive you crazy. When that shift happened, was there something noticeable in the industry about sort of everybody's general positivity across the board that I've got an iPod, now I can listen to as much music as I want and we don't have to listen to the same thing on repeat?
I can't speak for anybody else, but for me personally, absolutely. I mean, the being able to bring all that stuff out there and not have what we used to have was a selection of CDs, and I've even been on a boat that had a tape deck. That's, I'm aging myself there, but this was like an antique thing.
Was there an 8-track player on a previous
No,
boat too? I mean, my God.
I have never seen that, and unfortunately, a record probably wouldn't work out all that well on a
Not so
yacht.
much.
But
maybe on a gyroscope. Maybe something's got some tilt to it.
Yeah, right. A gimbal, just like the stove. But the other thing is the Bluetooth speakers and all that has made, because stereos were absolutely notorious for breaking. They just, you have these speakers that are sitting out in a salty environment, getting water washed on them, and they would fizzle out. They wouldn't last very long on these trips. But man, anytime I head offshore for a couple of months, I have like 3 different Bluetooth speakers, just as backup, because it's that important to me to be able to just hear another voice, let alone music and stuff like that while I'm out at sea, by myself. It helps keep my sanity, I think.
Totally. What about internet connectivity? I mean, do you keep a satellite connection while you're out on the water? Is that even feasible?
I do not. It is feasible now. Thank you, Elon Musk. Starlink has become a huge, huge proponent to sort of, grow the entire sailing social media industry at this point. I had always thought it would be pretty fascinating to get Starlink, head out to sea on a couple-month adventure, and be able to do live streams and daily updates and all that stuff. When I went around the world, the closest thing we got to that was I was reporting back via 170 character texts back to my mom. She would then go on a Facebook group and post those, and that was it. So it was short. It was real concise. There was no pictures or anything like that. Now I'm actually following Cole Brower, and she is an American who's solo racing around the world. She's in like second place. She's down at Cape Horn as we speak. And she grew on her Instagram from about 4,000 before she left. I started pushing her stuff out, and then now she's at about 275,000 followers, I think. And she's able to do daily updates. And that's basically, she took everybody along for the ride, not just in 170 characters, but in full crafted videos that her PR team, she sends the clips back, her PR team puts them together, and it's amazing. But it's all thanks to Starlink. And, I have mixed emotions about it, because with my small bit of updates on that trip around the world, I was able to experience the isolation aspect of that trip, which for a lot of people, I think just the word isolation sounds terrible and scary and stuff, but it's a real part of that adventure. And being disconnected from everything and not being able to check emails or do anything like that, I think that was part of what made that trip for me really, really special, as well as a bit more challenging. I can't, I don't know, because I've never been out there and had the ability to open up Instagram. Like I said, part of me is kind of like, I don't know if I want to do that. But I'm also pretty curious to see how it would, pump the numbers up and allow people to really get a glimpse of what it's like to go out by yourself for months at a time in a 50-year-old boat out in the wild ocean.
What you're saying here really resonates for me. I was just reading last night about a Spanish woman who set out to spend 500 days living in a cave. And her whole goal was to live alone, no connectivity to people. She allowed herself a limited amount of essentially panic button type functionality with a couple of things and a Wi-Fi router in the corner if things got really bad. Because she was trying to beat the record of another Eastern European gentleman who'd gone 300 days. But the gentleman who achieved that record, he had like a radio, and he had the ability to, make phone calls, and he could listen to music over the phone. And so I think one of the things that we think about when we're, sort of here on land looking at images of sailors of that nature is that the majesty and the romanticism of that isolation. But it's interesting to hear your comparison of it, because that's almost in of itself kind of a fantasy nowadays, because you can give yourself so much more connectivity than you used to. You really have to self-select into that kind of isolation. And now there's a bit of a trade-off for that. You don't get the social media bump that would otherwise normally bring. So the question ends up being, are you doing this for yourself and the experience of that? Or are you doing this for achievement, but also maybe for the numbers and to sort of bolster your presence when you're done with other opportunities down the road. Do you think about trying to do another around the world trip again and sort of do a similar kind of thing where you sort of promote it and talk about it more as a way to bring attention to it?
It sort of dances around in the back of my head. One of the tricky parts, though, is knowing the reality of what it's like, especially once you reach the Southern Ocean and you're totally on your own. There's no rescue. I mean, when these people do these races that are going on, like right now, it's called the Solo Ocean Challenge or something like that, and there's these huge full support teams, there's monitoring, there's rescue plans in and ready to go. When your average Joe like me heads off in his own little boat and just decides to go and sail around the world, we're on our own. There's nobody who's going to contact, the Chilean Navy to come out and do a rescue in the middle of the Pacific sort of thing. And knowing the reality of it, I often ponder just how risky that is to go and do, and just how lucky I was. I saw some really bad weather for sure, but I didn't see bad enough weather, or the one wave didn't hit me, or whatever happened, and I was able to make it through. When I think about trying to do it again and do it in a bit of a grander way, maybe add some extra miles on somewhere, that definitely gets the heart pumping a little bit. And the idea of, bringing along the rest of the world so they could see, what it would be like to go on an old boat when you're actually out there, not racing, you're not competing, you're not on a high performance vehicle, you're on an old 50-year-old vessel that's just plugging away at pretty much a fast jogging pace around the planet. And I think that is kind of interesting because of the time it takes. The world record for going around the world by yourself on a sailboat is 42 days. It took me 271. And obviously the other boat was like 100-foot trimaran on foils, and their budget was probably $10-15 million. My budget was like $100,000. I spent everything I had on it. So maybe dollar for dollar, we equal out somewhere along the way. But yeah, I think, sorry, I keep getting off in the weeds.
Don't worry about it. This is fascinating. I mean, this is an experience I'll never have, right? I will have neither the technical skill nor the determination to even think about sailing around the world. The most athletic thing I've ever done is pretend to run a marathon. So to me, this is such a again, I think for the average person, it's the question of the fantasy versus the reality, and the romantic versus the hardship. You and I were talking before about, the one wave that did take your boat out, and the real terror that filled you with for those few hours after. You don't think about that, right? This is just, there's the version of this as you're describing, which is backed by money and backed by resources and backed by support nets, versus if you're on a 50-year-old boat in the middle of the Indian Ocean and something goes south, you just have to figure it out. That's a harsher reality.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's, especially down there, you're so isolated that there's no help coming to you. Even if word gets out and they start diverting ships to your position, it might be a week. And if you end up in a life raft in the Southern Ocean, a week is going to be way too long. 2 days typically is going to be way too long before like hypothermia and all that sort of sets in. And that's something that, unfortunately, when you do a trip like that, it gets stamped so directly into the front of your brain that when you do think about, like, boy, trying to grow this whole social media kind of empire and everything, if I did another trip and I was able to do live podcasts and do live updates on this and that and actually grow this thing, then, just like you said with that question, why are you actually going out there? And funnily enough, one of the greatest gurus of solo sailing, Bernard Moitessier, he is an absolutely fascinating backstory, but he was huge in the sailing world. He set all sorts of records way back in the 1960s. And essentially, one of the things that he always talked about, he said, if you're going out to sea for any other reason than wanting to experience that and having that drive, the ocean is going to take you. And so for people who are going out there to make records and do this, and he was a pretty big eccentric, but I've always taken those words to heart that, you kind of have to have a bit of a pure intention when you're going out there. And if you don't really want to sail around the world, like if you're not up to it 100%, it's such a commitment that the ocean will break you down. It'll just break you apart. If you're just going out there to claim some fame, chances are you're gonna tuck tail and turn to land when it gets going, really hard out there. So I don't know. To answer your question overall, though, I think I rationalized the whole thing as far as wanting to do another big trip and bring everybody around, is that it has been very fun throughout all the different platforms to share the experiences of being alone out on a boat, crossing oceans, and taking on sort of these challenges. So, you got to weigh the things, pros and cons, and see what happens.
Yeah, I don't think I have that fantasy anymore. I think I'm pretty now squarely in I like my comfy chair and dry socks. I do recall a couple of times you tried to teach me, our mutual friend Greg Sams tried to teach me, and I don't have any real conception of the way that wind, the wind physics and dynamics should work with a sailboat. Like I can operate an engine. Yeah, I can run a speedboat, but the idea of being on the water and realizing very quickly how little I know, that removes any interest in my mind of like, yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. Like, I'm out. I'm done. That's
it's a very abstract way to try and propel a boat. I mean, first of all, you're heading out into, whether it's a lake or it's an ocean, you're heading out into a environment that without that boat, you're going to die. You cannot survive offshore in the world. Things will eat you, you will drown. That's a fact. And then to be able to propel the boat, you're actually trying to harness this invisible force, which you can only feel, you can't see. Add into the fact that, once the waves start rolling, now your boat and you are sometimes going up and down every 15 seconds, 20 or 25 feet. It can turn into a pretty miserable experience. But at the same time, you can, through going through really ugly weather I've gone through 2 weeks solid of just terrible, awful weather, uncomfortable, cold, miserable, and then come out the other end on one of the most perfect, sunny, beautiful days out in the middle of the ocean, all to myself. And through that, I've definitely learned that, you go through those hardships, they make that reward so much more intense and so much more gratifying. And as soon as you realize that, it's kind of weird. You almost become like, you want to go through more pain so that you can make that pleasure at the end that much better. I know there's a term for it. I'm blanking on it, but you're definitely, the ocean has taught me so many cool little lessons like that I then usually bring back to the ground, back to the earth when I tie up the boat. But there's something strange when you're on land and you get back into the norms of society and people and all the stuff and all the technology. It's so easy to start forgetting those lessons you learn. And then when I go back out to sea, it snaps you right back into them. So
I love that. I love too the idea of sort of coming out the other end. I mean, I've always thought of, this is why it's such a cliche, but sailing as a metaphor for life, right? The challenges and the 2 weeks of crap weather until coming out the other side on a beautiful day. Was there ever a moment where you did a sailing trip and you just at the other end of it were just sick as a dog? Because I feel like if you've been sailing as long as you have, right, you must have an iron constitution, right? Motion sickness must just not hit you anymore. But I feel like every time I get on a boat, I've got like, it's like a little kid who got on a roller coaster the first time. I'm going to lose my lunch, your lunch, and his lunch. Is that still a thing for you?
No. I've been fortunate. I grew out of my motion sickness when I was a kid. I was the one throwing up on the plane and in the backseat of the car and all that sort of stuff. Luckily, that sort of disappeared. But I do suffer very, very nasty land sickness. So when I've been out at sea for a couple of months, Or even if I've been out for a week in really rough weather, when I hit that dock, I mean, I look like Jack Sparrow walking, just like, whoa. And the earth on the last big trip where I went through all that rough weather, the earth felt spongy, and it continued on that way for like 3 days. I had to wait 24 hours before I could even consider getting into a shower, because when you lose, all the horizon around you, that's when you like fall and you can hurt yourself and all that sort of stuff. And I almost fell off the dock walking up and down. And so I suffer from that kind of, I guess, a reverse of seasickness.
I don't think I've ever heard of that before. Is that a common thing that like sailors on big trips come back and land is just completely foreign to them?
Oh yeah. Because it is. I mean, your body will, like, if we were to hop on a boat together and sail from LA to Hawaii, right? That's a 2,000-mile trip.
Anytime you just call, I'm there.
All right. Well, funny enough, that's in my retirement plan. I'd like to be able to take a bigger boat from the West Coast, buy one there and fix it all up and all that, and then sail it back to the East Coast via the trades around the world. And the trade winds are the nice, warm, steady, not too many storms kind of winds that can carry you basically through the South Pacific, north of Australia, into the Indian Ocean. The only tricky part is you got to get around the Cape of Good Hope on Africa. But it'd be another round the world trip, but it'd be not only me, but I'd be able to bring people with me for different legs of it. So, but if we were to be able to hop on it, first thing first, I'd pop a Dramamine, and you'd pop one too. That would give us a little head start. And typically, if you started feeling any sort of seasickness, usually within a day or two, it's gonna pretty much dissipate. But then on the other end, 2 weeks, 3 weeks later, when we hit Hawaii, guaranteed, the minute you stepped on solid ground, you'd kind of wobble and jolt a little bit because your body gets used to it. It's amazing.
Yeah. I never thought of my equilibrium as being something that was kind of local. I always sort of thought of it as something that was sort of set to the rest of the world, and it was the waves that I had to adjust to. But the fact that it would sort of adjust on the fly and then change back is almost incomprehensible. But I love, again, you talk about metaphor. I love the image that sort of creates of somebody. Again, you can't be an expert at everything, right? Your body can't expect to be an expert of sailing and then not get back on land and sort of feel maladjusted. Right.
Yeah.
You sort of have to get your groove again.
Oh, absolutely. And yes, for me, it's the rougher the weather or the length of time that I've been out at sea dictates exactly how long and how extreme it is. But yeah. Like I said, I was walking around. I had to get a ride just across the street to the gas station to get like a 6-pack of beer. That's, the usual the first thing you do when you get back on land. And, holy cow, I was like, I'll get arrested. Somebody will think I'm publicly intoxicated if I try and walk across the street. So somebody give me a ride, and they gladly did, which was nice.
That's awesome. I had a similar experience once. My wife and I and our then, he was probably 6 or 8 month old son. We're supposed to fly from Bainbridge Island off of Seattle up to the Orcas. And the idea was we were going to take a little, prop engine plane. The plane itself was out of service. So we ended up transferring to puddle jumpers, and we went to 3 different spots on, seaplanes. And by the time I landed on the third one and got to where we were going in the Orcas, I looked like I had been drinking all day and was just hitting the hangover period. Because I got off that day and I lost everything in my gut. And then of course it's a 20-minute drive with switchbacks up to the house that we're staying at. It's this lovely older couple. And the moment I walk out the car, I'm like, hi, nice to hold on. Whoo, and then just, in their backyard all over again. It was not a great introduction. So I you have my empathy. I feel you.
Well, can I ask
literally
you, when you did your long hike, and forgive me, I can't remember the name of that.
The Camino de Santiago.
Yes.
Yeah, we talked about that. Yep.
When you did that one, they often talk about long distance hikers as when you get to the end, sometimes it's very hard to stop. It's just put everything down and stop hiking. You get used to not just the motion, I guess, of walking, but the momentum that you create. Did you experience any of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think my experience is obviously different from yours. I hiked 15 miles a day across essentially mostly flat land, and I was, I mean, I had a backpack with me, sure, but I was chasing girls. I was not, I was not sort of hiking for myself, so to speak.
Grunting
But
over the mountains in the rain.
well, at the beginning and the end, but in the middle, it was pretty flat and boring. No, my feeling when I finally arrived was, it's sort of, you become accustomed to, I don't want to call it inertia, but certainly the momentum, right? That desire for forward progress, I think, becomes an expectation every day. It's hard to get into it. The first couple of days are, I got to get up at 5. I got to get moving by 6. How do I do that? And by the end, you're like, okay, I'm up. You're like, well, I'm in a hotel room at 5 a.m. Why am I awake? Oh, because, okay, my body thinks I need to go hike 12 or 15 miles again. I miss it, to be honest. There's still a part of me that feels that pull towards those long, slow, days, getting up in super early, trying to beat the sun before everything gets too hot. Because, of course, the Spanish sun beating down on you in the middle of the day is not great for, water retention. But I loved even the hard parts. I loved the experience of it. And yeah, I would go back and do it again in a heartbeat, because I feel like there's still a bit of that momentum left in me. Yeah. Do you have the same experience?
Yeah, I definitely did. I mean, I think I dubbed it at one point like momentum of the soul, where, and I know it sounds a bit whimsical or whatever, but you sort of get involved in this experience. And much like hiking and sailing for me, they are, when you do a long distance trail, it's 100% commitment. I mean, unless something breaks on you, you're going to keep going. There's really not, I've never really given myself the option of being like, well, I'm not having fun anymore. It's sort of like, well, I committed to do this. I quit my job. I spent all this money. I'm going to finish this, for better or for worse. And you get that momentum going. And I can remember getting up and crossing the border of New Hampshire and Maine. And, you're entering the last state. I was way earlier than I thought, because your pace just sort of picks up and you grow stronger and you hike faster. And I can remember pushing myself to like throttle back and slow down, but I would end up, at a place where I was going to camp at 2 p.m. And I had like 6 more hours of sunlight. And I'm thinking, okay, this is ridiculous. I got to keep going. And yeah, I wanted to hop over Mount Katahdin and just keep going. They have the international AT, which takes you well up into Canada. And, I had considered it a little bit, but I knew that, I set out for my goal. I'm going to stick to it. But yeah, there is this, I don't know, this thing that I think it's in your soul when you start these big endeavors. It's great, and you have to focus on that end goal that you're trying to reach. But sometimes, yeah, when you reach that, it's sort of like, I'm not done yet. I'm so used to this life now. I want to keep going.
I met people who made it their lives to just start the Camino over again. I remember one guy in particular was an older guy. He did not move very quickly. I think he maybe covered 3 or 4 miles a day, but he would sort of slowly over time progress across the Camino, and he'd bring these big, cook sets with him, and everywhere he'd go, he'd land in a hostel, he'd get checked in, and he'd make these big dinners for whoever he happened to be with, because he just decided to abandon regular life. And I guess he had the money to do it, but he made that his thing. I totally understand that pull. And I get to, as I imagine for the AT, it must have been for you, there's no responsibility beyond your own. Right? There's nothing to do except walk. There's nothing to care for except yourself. And obviously the people around you, and taking care of the nature that you're in, leave it nicer than you found it, is a good philosophy across the board. But there's no mortgage. There's no, job. There's no, there's no other people you're attached to that you have to take care of. There's a simplicity to that, and an unending goal. You just got to keep walking the next day. And there's a joy in that I found, that it sounds like you did too. And readjusting back to real life sucks after that experience.
It definitely does. I think there's always a little honeymoon phase of, you get back to reality, and all of a sudden there's these conveniences, and, I'm going to order a pizza, and, I'm going to take a shower in my own shower, not in this crummy hostel shower, and all that sort of stuff. But that fades quickly. And actually that's a subject that I've talked about quite a bit, which is I call it post-adventure depression, where you're trying to conform back into sort of a quiet life. And I've actually talked to veterans who come back from Iraq, Afghanistan, and stuff, and they kind of, we have a lot that's in common as far as what's going on in our heads. Obviously theirs is a little bit more severe and more towards like PTSD, and I've suffered from that as well when a trip goes really, really wrong, like the one in 2022. But yeah, it's, you get that honeymoon phase and then it's over, and you know, the light goes a little dim, and the happiness level just sort of plummets. And I don't know, for hiking, you have to also, I think of just the physical aspect of the amount of dopamine that you are pumping through your body, hiking 10 hours in a day, sweating it out. I mean, you're in, I would usually after an hour be almost buzzed when I was hiking down the trail. You know, I'm like, hey, look at the squirrel over there, and that's a pretty tree. And you know, meanwhile, it's like raining on me or stuff. But I was genuinely very happy. And I do attribute that to the exercise. But yeah, it's that depression that it usually sticks with me for about 2 months after any trip longer than maybe a month out at sea. And yeah, it's one where you have to like snap yourself out of it for sure. But it's also a little self-destructive for me personally, because I'll sit there and I'll eat whatever and I'll drink whatever, and I'm basically wrecking my body, which can turn into a pretty vicious cycle. And at my age now, you can't get away with that too much before it really just gets a hold of you and never lets you go again. So
I was just going to say I had the exact same experience after the Camino, where like for about 3 months afterwards, I was not only like 10 or 15 pounds skinnier, but I could just throw back, you know, just, you know, give me a mountain of pasta and an entire bottle of wine and I'm done in 20 minutes. So I certainly feel that. And yeah, I mean, I think somebody referred to it when I did it as the now what period. You know, you're just like, you're in this depressive phase of like, all right, well, I did this thing. Now what exactly? Like what else do I have to go for next? And it can be an addictive cycle. I think you're right. I think the important thing is for me at least, and I hope you have the same experience. I found, you know, taking more alone time when I'm back in my own life and reflecting rather than just sort of being sad about it and being sort of depressed for that dopamine hit, helped me work through some of those challenges. It sounds like you've got a better process for it now than maybe you did before, such that you can recognize it and really deal with it.
Yeah, because I've gone through it maybe 5 or 6 times total in my life, and it's always the same, and it almost always lasts about a month or two, and typically it is me sort of waking up and looking at myself and really just being like, all right, man, what are you doing? You're just on this sort of downward spiral here, and a lot of times it takes figuring out what the next adventure will be. That's what helped me initially in the beginning. And now it's sort of me trying to figure out a way to turn the everyday things that I'm doing in my life into the adventure, getting excited about them, even things just like podcasting, just like doing the speaking engagements, all that sort of stuff. Instead of trying to, you know, see those as like, oh, these side things and this work that I have to do, try and kind of see that as like, that's the next adventure. It's like, okay, so for this next year, these are going to be the goals for the show, and this is what I'm going to try and reach at. And all of a sudden, in a way, it almost gives me just a little bit of purpose back, because I think that depression really comes from the fact that you're going from a very stringent, high purpose sort of lifestyle where you have that goal, you know why you're doing it, you know why you're up at 5 a.m. at the hostel. And then all of a sudden you get back to life and you're just trying to kind of create your life again. And it's hard to see that purpose through all the weeds, and if you don't have those specific goals and challenges that you're trying to sort of set for yourself. So when I would basically try and snap out of it, I'd be like, all right, we need a game plan. And I'm just sitting there talking to myself, looking in a mirror. But I needed something that gave me purpose, that gave me a reason to get out of bed and, you know, go for a 2-mile jog or go and work out or not order a pizza and start drinking beers at 2 in the afternoon. So that's seemingly what has helped me the most, I think.
I love it. I love the self-reflection and the healthy attitude that engenders. So kudos to you. I think that's the right approach. Well, unfortunately, our time is wrapping up. Before we go, I just want to make sure we shout out for everybody. If somebody wants to learn more about your adventures, support you directly, like where should they go? What's the right spot to hit you up and start following?
Well, this is the nice part. I've kept it all very easy. So I in
All right, let's hear it.
2019, I wrote the book Sailing into Oblivion, and I kept that moniker across everything. So Instagram, TikTok. I haven't done TikTok in a while, but there's a lot of videos on there, big catalog, YouTube. Everything is under Sailing into Oblivion, and the website sailingintooblivion.com that has all the information about like speaking engagements and all that sort of stuff. So, and the podcast, obviously, Sailing into Oblivion podcast.
Well, and who knows, maybe if you turn into the Sailing into Oblivion podcast, you might hear a shockingly familiar voice from a guy with glasses. Not that you would know that from a podcast. Never mind. You get the idea.
Well, if we can get together and you help me with some of the video formatting and stuff like that, I think there's a reason that we somehow came together again, and I'm really, really glad. And this was absolutely phenomenal.
No, man, it's been my pleasure. I really appreciate not only you reaching out, but the conversation. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff here that hopefully folks have enjoyed listening and watching, listening to and watching rather. Thanks again. I really do appreciate it. And folks, if you're, listening and watching and you like what you see in here, be sure to subscribe, Jason Nellis on pretty much every platform you could imagine. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.